Pardon me? Good afternoon and welcome to our special council meeting for Thursday, December 7th, 2023. I'll call the meeting to order at 4:32 p.m. First item on the agenda item 1.1, Land Acknowledgement. The Town of Coaldale acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot peoples of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot peoples past, present, and future while recognizing their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The Town of Coaldale is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Agenda item 1.2, Conflict of Interest Declaration, Pecuniary and Non-pecuniary. Are there any in the room this afternoon? None declared, thank you. Moving on to acceptance of the agenda, agenda item 2.1 for the regular council meeting for December 7th, 2023. Are there any additions or deletions? Seeing none, could I get someone to make a motion to adopt the agenda as presented? Deputy Mayor Saylor, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to a business arising from the minutes, agenda item 6.1. We have the 2024 budget deliberations, and we have our Chief Financial Officer and Deputy CAO, Kyle Beauchamp, presenting. Kyle, whenever you're ready.
Thanks and good evening, Mayor and Council. So yes, this is the fourth budget meeting that we have here. So this is a accumulation of the service level discussions, the operating budget, and the capital budget. And what we've presented here is a summary of those items that we've previously discussed, kind of a one package here for you. So the intent of this meeting is to show the cost implications of all the budget items previously discussed, and then administration's requesting feedback from council as to essentially the yay or nay on these items that are proposed. Do they get to stick in the budget or amended or removed? So as we start here, based on everything that's in the package for the operating budget, this top figure here shows the year-over-year funding deficit that would have to be made up by the Town of Coaldale to fund the budget in its entirety. So you can see for 2024, it's $495,000, which is the equivalent of a 5.11% increase in funding. Follow up to 25 and 26 at 4.38 and 4.22%. Just for some context here, if you're looking at the budget and if we do make adjustments, how much will this impact the tax rate? You can see for 2024, a 1% change in taxes is equivalent of just under $100,000. And then for funding here, we do show the change in tax. I just also wanted to point out the net impact on the change in franchise fees also has in the operating budget as well. So this is some commentary information that hopefully will be as use as we go through the budget and start to make these decisions. First start off, this is kind of a capital item, but the operating budget and the capital budget has additions to our debt capacity and our debenture required to fund these capital projects, and our operating budget essentially funds the debt required. So based on the capital budget presented to the council, this is our estimation of our debt limit and our actual debt from 2022 up to 2029. So you can see currently for the year end here, we're at approximately 55%. That would increase up to 70% in 2025, further decreasing down to 46% in 2029. Just to note that the debt limit is calculated at approximately 1.5 times our operating revenues for the year.
Kyle, I'm just going to get you to pause for a moment. I just wanted to go over a few of the ground rules here now that we have everybody here, is that we have a sheet that's in front of you that has the operating budget proposal that Kaylin and Kyle put together. And on the far right-hand side is when we're talking about the decision options where you can say yes or no to their request for your own so that you can kind of keep track of where we are. And then also, I just wanted to make note as well that staff have put a lot of work into putting these proposals together. So at the end of the discussion, we can ask the presenters questions like we always do. But it's important to note that when it comes to debating, we're going to be debating amongst ourselves, not with staff. So we have to give them the courtesy that they just prepared the information and it's for us to deal with. Also, if you look on the agenda for the fees and rates and bylaw, there's areas that are highlighted in yellow, and that's what we're going to be discussing at today's council meeting. So any other questions about service fees, rental rates for different facilities, we can save all that for when we start our committee of the whole meetings, and then we can bring those kind of discussions back to council. So in the essence of time, we want to kind of stay focused on the presentation at hand. So with that being said, Kyle, if you want to continue then, please.
So moving on from the question on, or the comments on debt capacity, these are some of the items, or sorry, this first page here does have the operating budget items that are being included here for discussion for council. So going left to right, you can see the actual budget proposal followed by the cost and the proposed funding. So one of the items when we had the operating budget last time that council did request further information on was the PPE for the fire department. So we do have a short little presentation here that I'm going to pull up and ask our fire chief to kind of come to the table and walk us through this presentation on the PPE proposal. Can use that.
Thank you, Kyle, and good evening, Mayor and Council. So just a little bit of a presentation that I've put together on some of the various PPE items that we discussed last time going through budget. So each PPE item that we did talk about does have its own slide. I'll kind of try to just hit the highlights in there. These are all the different items that we did look at last time. So one of these items is our rescue gloves, which are utilized for extrication or more specific rescue situations where we require a lot more dexterity. Each of the slides also you'll see kind of a comparison of various products that are out there, kind of from the basic lower end product to the higher end product, and in cases where we're already using that product, I've just highlighted the current product that we're using. As well, each slide kind of outlines what we require for numbers right now, as well as kind of a typical lifespan that we see. So with these, they can range anywhere from just a standard work glove right through to a higher end extrication glove. And you can see there's various different aspects to it. I kind of feel that we're in the midline product with this, with our current product being $85 a pair, with some of the options that it does have listed in there. Uh-oh. There it goes. The next one on there was fire gloves. So these are our gloves that we use when we're actually dealing with fire situations. Again, ranging from the basic structural glove that we have, a cheaper glove at $100 a pair. A lot of a shorter life expectancy with these than the ones we are currently using now. We have used the two options on here, the cheaper option in the past and the one we're currently with now, but we found with that the quality just wasn't there with the cheaper glove, and we had to bump up to more of a midline glove to be able to extend the life a little bit more and not be replacing them quite so often. One of the other items, and this is a pretty specific item, not really any comparisons or ranges, because we already do use the MSA G1 SCBAs. We currently don't have any spare extra mass, so if somebody were to damage one, break one, anything like that, we wouldn't have any replacements right now. That individual would be sharing with somebody else or out of service for the time being. That, as well as we currently only have as many as we need for our members right now. So if we do any recruiting, we do have an extra or need for more as well. Wildland masks. So these are the masks. The previous one is with our self-contained breathing apparatus. These wildland masks are used for non-IDLH environments, but environments where we still need respiratory protection. So there's quite a range in here, from a basic mask that uses an N95 to filter out some of those contaminants, up to more of a face piece mask, which we currently have right now. One of the big things that we have noted is with our wind conditions and things like that, that a lot of our members quite enjoy the face piece mask just for protection from flying debris. And not a huge range with these ones from the current product to some alternative ones as well. Our structural helmets, these are helmets that we use for a majority of our calls, except for wildlands, which you'll see later, or calls where we don't need quite that same protection. So we have everything ranging from a basic structural helmet, which currently goes for about $525. Our current product is one of our low profile traditional helmets, which is a little bit lighter weight, a little bit lower profile, and a little bit more heat resistive and crack resistive, which is just a little bit safer as well. Our wildland helmets, I would say for that we are in a bit of a more of a basic product right now, which is kind of what we would be looking to stick with, which it would be just increasing and replacing some that are a little overdue. These are used for situations where we don't require that structural helmet in an IDLH environment. So wildland fires or other tasks that we might be doing. And again, we're in that basic wildland helmet already. Our structural boots, I added a little bit more on here. It kind of ranges from low end with a rubber boot. Unfortunately, I was going to compare it to the product that we're in right now that's just come up expired in 2021, but that product is no longer manufactured. So the next kind of comparable one is the mid-range boot that was pretty much comparable in specs to the one that we run right now. Other than the last about 5 people that have gotten boots are in the current one on the far end there, which has a little bit more with increased winter grip and flexibility and some fit as well. Station boots, this is actually one thing that we've never had before for our volunteers. This would be for doing tasks that don't require structural boots. Things such as truck checks, working on the apparatus floor, medical calls, those types of things. Right now, anytime that they are doing calls where they need foot protection, they're using their structural boots. So this would provide a much better option to reduce some of that wear and tear on the structural boots as well. Coveralls, the purpose of these is kind of for wildland events as well as other events where we don't require our full bunker gear. They can be used for medical calls as well or other technical related calls. So the basic product and the current product are pretty much the same product, just with the features added. Things such as the radio pocket, mic loop, and throwing patches and stuff like that on. So pretty much similar, just with getting those additions on. And then our hoods are balaclavas. So there's quite a bit of a range in here. But one of the main differences from the basic hood up to the more higher end hoods is sizing, as well as some of the carcinogenic filtering to kind of take some of those chemicals out that we're exposed to, have a little bit better fit and made of some different materials. So the basic hoods are kind of that one size fits all, doesn't really have a lot of shoulder contour and stuff like that. Whereas the product that some of our individuals have right now and that we're looking to run is a little bit more reinforced, better materials, and increased thermal protection as well. I think that's it.
Thank you, Chief. I'll open it up to members of council if they have any questions for the Chief. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and may I ask a question through the chair to Clayton? Okay. I have several questions. One, with regards to all of the requested material, apparel, I assume then from the very basic price to the most expensive price, the basic price would be CSA approved or OH&S approved?
Yeah,
apparel?
there's nothing on this that's not OH&S approved. Yeah.
Second question I have, so the boots that you are suggesting for, I guess, day-to-day needs, would they have to be provided to the whole team, or could you just provide them to those that are going to be doing day-to-day work at the fire hall?
You're talking like these ones up here right now, Councillor
That is
Chapman?
correct.
Yeah.
You're asking about the boots and whether. So my opinion would be we wouldn't need to supply every volunteer firefighter with those, would we?
Yeah, so we do have a lot of times where we do have all our staff in there for truck checks and things like that, as well as we do have oftentimes they'd be a lot more functional for some of our lower acuity calls like medical calls, those types of things where we could have a variety going on, and then that way our people aren't sharing as well.
Okay, my third question then is, so with this price range that you're offering, I'm just curious to know the amount of time that your volunteers would be suited up. In other words, if we went with a mid-range price, would that be suitable for everyone as compared to a very basic price range?
Yeah, a lot of our stuff other than our boots and our I think the only two off the top of my head are our structural boots and our helmets. I think everything else is pretty much kind of in that mid to low range. The one nice thing with some of the boots and the helmet stuff is they are items that are a little bit more hard on guys, whether it's the weight of the helmet, those types of things, or the fit, as compared to some of the stuff. I know we're not really talking about the coats and pants right now, but we often purchase more of the mid to low range coats and pants, just because it's not as big of a deal with fit and feel. But yeah.
Okay. A final question that's out of your purview in terms of your PPE request here, and that is with regards to issue apparel for ceremonial purposes. I would just encourage you to keep your pulse on that. I really appreciate having our personnel in uniform when they have to appear at ceremonial purposes, and I'm not too sure if that's a town issue or if that's through the association or whatever, but that can be a question for another day.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments? Thank you, Clayton.
So rather than going through each of these items here Mayor, what I'd propose is just opening the floor to council. If there's any questions on these, we can circle back to the yes or no once we're done the presentation, once council has seen everything in its entirety. So just pause if there's any questions from any members of council on these items here.
Councillor Chapman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe through to Kyle then. So your PP for cost of $90,000 is for what price, or what price ranges are we looking at for each of the apparel? Are we sort of the high end of the spectrum, or are we at the mid range, or what would be the price that we'd be looking at?
I've been told it's the one on the mid range, so the ones that have been recommended in the presentation that you just saw.
Thank you.
Okay. Going on to the next item here. So these again are proposals for the operating budget, but they relate more to funds to reserve for capital projects. So the road rehab program, that is part of an annual program that we're looking to implement. The rest of the reserve transfers are essentially building up savings for future year capital projects. And then the RCMP addition in 2025 as proposed. So as part of the last budget presentation, there was some discussion about the assumption of the RCMP 70-30 split, in which we are making a request for. Should the town not be successful in the pursuit of this split, the administration has proposed budget amendments to eliminate the potential savings, or to adjust for the eliminated potential savings if we're not successful in this program. So this is how the budget amendment would look in the event of such a situation.
Councillor Abrey has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. And so it still concerns me that we have fully committed $600,000 that we don't have. A verbal commitment from ADMs is one thing, or from ministers. ADMs trying to figure out where they're going to pull the funding from, and we're looking at passing a budget, with a substantial increase in utility rates and in property taxes. And I did ask if we could look at cutting back on what we were putting into reserves, and I didn't see that anywhere. I seen items taken out of the line, but I didn't see that there was a cut in still moving money from those accounts into reserves. And so, there's a lot of no's in this for me because of that, because I stated this in the last meeting as well. We've got a lot of people in our town that are one paycheck away from not being able to. We've got a lot of people that are on fixed income. So if you increase property taxes by $300 and utility rates by $300 in a year, that's $600 per household. There isn't that kind of money to go around. And I'm really concerned about the asks compared to, what do we need to remain with the same level of service? I'll go back to the fire department, 90,000. We could get a helmet for $425 rather than $800. Will it last 10 years the same as the other one? It's NFP 1971. Yes, it will. Saves half of that money to stay into that capital account. There is always a tax impact. I'm going to steal a line from our neighbors to the west, and I've got to be accountable to my bosses. That's the taxpayers, and making sure that I'm doing my due diligence when I'm looking at this budget. And I appreciate all the work that's gone into it, Kyle. I know that you put a lifetime of work into it this year's because you know our philosophy as well. But I still need to work with the rest of my colleagues around this table to see where we need to go at. I don't think we've even discussed the yes, no's, and it's really not fair to you as administration, because here we are at the 10th hour, hoping something will get looked at and passed today. I think there's a lot of deliberations still in this budget before we even go anywhere near passing a capital or operational budget. But I do appreciate the work that's gone into it.
So with that being said, Councillor Abrey, back to the fire department, like, I don't want to be bouncing all over this whole list here. So the ask is 90,000, that'll come out of the operational surplus. So your question is that you want them to cut back and when I say the quality of the product they're looking for, it's not necessarily the quality, but you can get different items for a different amount of dollars, right? So what is your question regarding the fire side then?
So my question would be, is this year to want the wants, or do we just provide what we need to provide the service? It's nice to have the traditional helmet. I know that. I was in that business for 38 years, but is this the year to be looking at the twice the amount? Is this the year to be looking at, when we say substantial amount of time in station boots, what substantial amount? Is it 2 hours a month? Is it 6 hours a month? Do we look at the response of the volunteers and we say, you know, if you're over this, you get these, but if you're under this, if you're not going on the medical calls, do you need the station boot? Unless things have changed and you're doing unit checks more than you were. When I was on the department, it was once a month for 2 hours. That's how long I'd put a station boot on. But do I want the oil and gas and the other stuff spilt on my station boots? Or do I want them on my bunker gear so it can be fully scrubbed off and ready for the next call? So that's my feeling on that. I feel we can, keep 30,000 of this budget in the capital budget rather than pulling out 90. Maybe that we can pull out 60. But it's not my department. That's a decision that all of council needs to make.
Thank you, Councillor Abrey. So we'll just do a placeholder for that one. Let's move down to the any questions on the door access system. That is something that we spoke about at the last budget meeting, and for myself personally, they have some doors that have the access system and they have several that don't. So can we go through a few of these and see where we can be with that? And then we have everybody represented from the different departments in the room here, and then we can ask further questions on that if that's okay moving forward. So is there anybody against the door access system? So take that as a yes then. We've already had a presentation on the photo radar and the bylaw operator. That's a $35,000 price tag for 2024, and there's no tax impact on that. Is there anybody against that one? Councillor Abrey.
Thank you, Mayor. And I just, not speaking in favor or not speaking against, the province took photo radar off of ring roads in a 14-day period in two of the major centers, cut out millions of dollars out of their budget. Is this something that we need to be cognizant of in the future when we're looking at our budgets, that the provincial government doesn't think this is a cash cow throughout every municipality and pull it and put more sheriffs in place for those millions of dollars? So I'm really concerned about putting more money into a program when we're seeing provincial cuts already on major thoroughfares throughout the province. So it could happen here. I just think we need to be very cautious as we start building these budgets. We're building our projections on today, not on what we're seeing happening throughout the province.
Thank you. So again, the bylaw operator for photo radar, there's no tax impact on that, and that'll be a CPO position. So again, is there anybody against the $35,000 ask? And we're just going through this list for what I'm saying right now, just to get the count. is not written in stone at this point, so that's going to be a yes. The Alberta Advantage Immigration Program, that was presented by Cameron Mills for that $9,000 ask. Is there anybody against that one? That's a yes. The community services position that we went into depth last budget meeting, that's a $42,000 tax increase. It's a $42,000 position that will be paid for by a tax increase. Is there anybody against that one? That's a yes. The utility operator for 2025, that's a $52,000 ask. We had that presentation at last council meeting, and that'll be done through a utilities increase. Is there anybody against that one? That's a yes, thank you. The museum annual funding increase for $25,000, that'll be funded by tax increase. Councillor Abrey has a question or a comment.
Again, I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this, Mayor. I believe if we are going to be looking at giving any type of nonprofit within our municipality extra funding, that they owe us the decency of providing us their unaudited financial statements so we can see the what and the whys. Do they need this $25,000? Again, is it to have a surplus in their account? Well, I don't think that's fair to our bosses, the ratepayers. So I'm speaking against this until we can get further information from the GEM.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor. Just for clarity's sake, this museum annual funding increase, $25,000, when we're talking about increase, is it an increase from something else? And second, the question I have will be, who is this money going to? Is it to the Museum Society, or is this going to the actual building, either operations or building maintenance or whatever we want to define it as?
This $25,000 does represent an increase from the annual funding that has already been approved. So we're to go up from $30,000 to $55,000. This would go to the Gem of the West largely for their, I believe, their operations and their staffing. This was part of the presentation that the Gem of the West did present to council earlier this year.
Thank you, Mayor, or thank you, Kyle. So that that report was given to us for information. There was no decision made on their request. Is that correct?
There was no formal ask at that time, but the museum board did present to council with their future vision and their financial needs to essentially maintain their staffing resources at that time.
Thank you. I would have probably should have done a review of that in terms of learning what their request was, so that we have a better understanding of what the society is looking for.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. I also have to agree with Councillor Abrey on getting a little bit more information on that one as well. Councillor Pickering.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. We definitely can provide a financial statement to council to look at and show exactly why they want it, and it is for staffing issues. So yeah, I definitely can provide that to council.
Thank you. And if I could just put this out to our CAO, like for this particular one, for the 25,000, and we've talked about it at another budget meeting already, is that something that can be discussed after that it can come back before we set the rate in March and April?
Yes, I think that would actually be helpful, because to sift through and analyze the financial statements between now and when council has to make a decision on whether to pass this budget as presented or amended, or an interim budget if no decision can be reached, that's adding a lot of pressure. But if we have until April, that's a more realistic time frame for us to take a closer look at that information.
Thank you. Everybody's okay with that? Okay, thank you. We'll do
Sorry,
it,
Mayor.
please.
Mayor. So the question is that we would have a report to us that council would approve before March. Is that what I'm hearing? And then council would make a decision in March as to what that number will be for the Museum Society.
That's
Is
correct.
that correct? Thank you.
So that one will be a placeholder as well. And then just for the viewers at home, Kyle, if you could go over, give us a Reader's Digest version of the next one, the resourcing proposal.
Yeah, I'm going to pass that over to the CAO. I believe he was the one who had presented this to council at a previous council meeting.
The resourcing proposal here represents the net cost impact of some additional positions that we require to keep up with our growth in both the infrastructure and the planning and development department. And the reason that the net impact is only the 111,483 is that we have other sources of revenue that'll be coming in as a result of our growth, including higher than anticipated subdivision fees and the revenue associated with those fees, as well as our ability to reduce the amount of reliance that we have on external consultants in both the planning and engineering side. It follows that if we have more resources in-house, that we will be able to cut back on the amount of external assistance that we have to augment our workloads, like in a nutshell.
Thank you. Any questions, comments on that one? Seeing none, then I want to ask a question. Is there anybody against the $111,483 price tag for the resourcing proposal, and that'll be funded through a tax increase? Thank you. That's a yes. And then the last item that was presented on previously is the replacement of the financial management software. That's a $200,000 price tag, and that's coming out of the operational surplus and technology reserve. Is there any questions or comments on that one? Councillor Beekman.
Thank you. And just refresh my memory, is this a mandatory?
This is a mandatory. So our current software that we use, which is essentially the backbone for all our functions, is reaching its end of life. So by the end of by the end of 2025, it will be discontinued, in which we will be forced to make a transition. So currently we're exploring different options as to providers and how to transition from there. Part of the large implementation cost, we don't essentially, to this day, know exactly what, because we're such in the early stage, what the exact realm of that implementation will be. We've seen from other municipalities, for example, Lethbridge County just underwent such a program in which their budget was $400,000. But we're quite confident with the staffing power and resources we have. We don't need the same level of external assistance to complete this process, and that we can do more of it in-house rather than rely on contractors to help in the transition process. So this, again, is something that we're not going to spend the money just because it's available. If we can do a better job and we can do it internally, we will be doing that.
If I can follow up on that. Okay, just for clarity on the funding streams here. So you've got 2023 operational surplus plus technology reserve. So that's just where it says dependent on the actual 2023 operating surplus amount. So that's literally just whatever your ratios are going to be then, right?
Essentially, yeah. So this isn't an item that, when we've talked about like fleets and buildings before, we're putting money aside to those programs every year. Our IT reserve is just kind of a fund that's accumulated through the year. So we don't put money into it every year. So we try not to drain it when we can if we're not putting money into it. So depending on what the actual surplus is for 2023, our suggestion would be to utilize those funds to it. So we're not utilizing any new tax dollars. So we believe we can fund most of it through the surplus, but if that does change, we may have to dip into that technology reserve just to balance it out. Does that answer your question? To an extent, yes. Okay.
Councillor Abrey.
Thank you, Mayor. I got a couple questions for Kyle. So is this program something that we can pay over a 10-year period, or is it $200,000 upfront?
Yeah, so there's twofold. So there's the annual licensing fee, which we already have included in the budget. So that's not part of this. This upfront cost is a lot of times when you have these transitions to a new external software, this is the cost for them to take your existing data, which think of essentially every transaction we've ever had through the town for the past 10 years or historical data. It's take all of that and essentially put it into the new software and make your new out-of-the-box software customizable and ready for Coaldale. So it's unfortunately an item that's essentially due up front and due before you drive the new model off. This is an item that we believe we have very capable resources in-house that we can minimize the actual reliance on the external consultants to do most of this work ourselves. But there may be some, we just don't know yet.
So we're not going to, in a year, find out our maintenance costs went from 30,000 to 200,000 because we've upgraded this program.
So our current licensing fee now is $65,000. For the budget for 2025, we've bumped that up to $100,000. We're also trying to consolidate a lot of the other programs that we use, such as budgeting and asset management, to reduce the impact on that as well.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Is there anybody opposed to the replacement of the financial management software as presented for the $200,000? Councillor Abrey.
Thanks. I just have one follow-up question. So you said the existing program is good till the end of 2025. So is this something that council, if we felt so needy to move something, we could move to 2024, or would you rather get it in and start implementing it before the other one is?
These transition processes can generally, when you do it, you budget a year for it to take. So with our existing software, essentially the plug being pulled on December 2025, we're going to need at least a year to make the transition and to make sure everything's running properly before the other software is essentially dead.
Thank you for the clarification. So one more time, Councillor Pickering has a question.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. So we'll be up to date on this when this is changed. How long will this be good for, this software?
Our current software that we have has been in place since 2011 or 2012, I believe. So it's the current one we've used is it'll be 15 to 12 years once it's fully through its lifestyle. So we're going to be at least 10 years that we're going to utilize this software as well. So this isn't just a 2-year thing. This is a long-term investment.
Okay, thank you.
So one more time, is there anybody against the replacement of the financial management software? Thank you. That's a yes. So Kyle, we're just going to sit on the PPE for now, if you want to just continue on with your presentation.
Sure. Would you like to discuss these items on the slide next, Mayor, as council? Or would you like to go through the capital budget before we circle back to these reserve proposals?
No, we can definitely talk about the next slide. So just to talk about Councillor Abrey's comment about this first slide, based on the 70-30 cost share that we're going to be successful in being made whole again. Can you just go over the third slide? So if we do not get that funding, if he can just go over
Yep.
the impact on that.
So I'll just highlight for 2024 just for simplicity. So essentially the savings, estimated savings of $580,000 are being fully reinvested into future capital expenditures and maintenance of our programs that we believe fit within council's strategic plan. So the road rehab program, the arena expansion, and the town shop replacement, as long as some change there for the pathways. So if these savings do not happen, these programs essentially do not happen, and there's not funding available for them. So if the savings are successful, we can take those funds and invest it directly back into the community for future needs and current needs through the road program. And if we're not, those programs would essentially be cut with no funding from the 70-30 split.
And then just for everybody's to remember, if you could just go through one more time the road rehab program with when we discussed about bypassing 2024.
Certainly. So for the road rehab program, what we're looking to do is, again, if successful in the 70-30, is that there is $425,000 allocated for next year, followed by $575,000 for 2025. So those two balances accumulate to $1 million. Due to economies of scale and efficiencies, we aren't proposing to invest these funds each year. We are proposing to combine the 24 amounts and the 25 amounts in the $1 million and invest that in 2025. So if these amounts are approved and the RCMP cost sharing is approved, there would be no road rehab for 2024, but we would take those funds and push it down the road to 2025 to magnify the potential benefits from the economies of scale.
Thank you. And then if we do not get the funding, just go over one more time for our viewers at home where the funding is going to come from.
Certainly. So if we do not get the funding, you do see here that it reduces the availability to implement these programs. So there are essentially two options for council. You can maintain without having these programs and this funding available for these resources, or we can essentially cut services in other areas or increase taxes to fund these areas. So one item of note, going to the capital budget, since we're talking about this item, the sanitary trunk line for phase 2, council will see that on their capital budget sheet that looks like this. I'll scroll to that slide. Right at the bottom, that's line, you'll see note number 12 there. So the estimated cost for the sanitary trunk phase 2 is about $5 million, and a lot of the cost is associated with levies, but since we have multiple levy projects coming up, some delays with future developments, and some reallocation of funds from our land sale account, there is an existing need to redirect some of the funds to fund this project. So what we are proposing, again, assuming we are successful in the 70-30, is that the $1 million for 2025 would be allocated to the road rehab program for the sanitary trunk line. Because 16th Avenue will essentially be totally torn up, this would be the first road rehab program for that year. So those funds we are proposing to directly tie to a capital project for 2025. Going forward past that year, assuming there is the funding model is improved in theory, that should essentially leave $1 million or close to that $1 million available for annual maintenance of Coaldale's roads going forward.
Thank you, Kyle. Any follow-up questions for Kyle on that before I go through the list? So based on the 70-30 split being rectified and Coaldale being made whole, if you want to look at the slide where it's based on us getting that 30%, the road rehab program where we're going to hit the pause button for 2024, is there anybody against that one? Councillor Abrey. Councillor Pickering? Anybody else? So just for the sake of having an open discussion, so you, Councillor Pickering and Councillor Abrey, you want us to continue on putting money into road repair in 2024?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So it's not that I'm against the road rehab. I am not going to spend money I don't have. We've done that with other projects. I don't want to project and assume anything at this time. So I am not prepared to, I understand this, I respect this, but I'm not going to commit anything until I see money coming in. I believe this is something that we can look at once we see that first payment come in, whether we know the dollar amount or when we know the dollar amount, if there's going to be a dollar amount. Because a lot of the stuff that we have approved last term, this term, were all based on projections of rental of facilities and what the revenue is going to be. And I don't want to be, again, like our municipalities around us where we get into trouble and in 10 months we projected too high for our revenue and now we're going to be looking for $1 million or $2 million, which is equivalent to 20 million for the city. So I'm just really reluctant to approve anything until we see that cash coming in, we see the dollars.
Thank you. Councillor Pickering.
Yeah, just to follow up on, and what Councillor Abrey said, that's my thoughts on that too, is I'm just not comfortable spending money we haven't seen yet. And once it does show up, we can carry on and discuss how much we want to go on then and put into these funds.
Kalen's got a comment.
I just wanted to throw out to council the mechanics of how this could potentially work. The items that are listed here in the event that we aren't successful in the 70-30, council can make these items conditional on receiving the 70-30. And because they are in reserve accounts for projects set aside in future years, there won't be any actual expenditures. We'll just be setting aside the money in an account at a future date. And you will know sometime, hopefully this year, but if not this year, it'll be next year, what the final verdict is. So it's just something that council can make conditional on. And these aren't projects that we're going to be tendering and expending funds on speculation January 1st, 24.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Kalen, for that bit of clarity there. I guess there's so much weight on from this slide on the hopes that we will be made whole, and I would speak in favor of, for example, of the road rehab program and the rest. But the but part is the concern that I have is that we don't know yet until we see it in actuality. I hate to jump in full steam and then realize that we're not going to be made whole with those hopes. That being said, my question will be to Kyle. In your planning, with the road rehab program, there will be some monies spent in 24 for some rehabilitation. Do I remember, is that correct from what you mentioned a couple of meetings ago?
No, sorry, there would be no funding for 2024 for road rehab. So the funds designated for that, again, under the assumption we're successful, would all be pushed forward to 2025.
So any patching or like
any patching that we're essentially already doing, we'll maintain through our roads general operating budget. But what you saw on 11th Street, for example, through the whole repavement of that, nothing of that nature would happen that would be related to this program. Same with all the other funds here designated for future capital reserves. These are funds that are not designated for any expense to be spent next year. So please rest assured we're not looking to spend any of these monies before any formal approval. They're just essentially us planning placeholders. If we don't get it, it is what it is. We don't get it. We can easily cut it out of the budget, but we're not spending anything until that, until we find out if we're successful or not.
Okay, thank you. I'm just concerned, I just want to ensure that we do have assurance with our residents and ratepayers here in Coaldale that there will be, we won't be abandoning any maintenance of any sort, but that we would continue on with any essential or disaster or whatever you want, any essential service that might be required in terms of maintenance or emergency, something of an emergency situation.
We will be able to continue the regular patching that we do, but we won't be able to do anything that extends and enhances the useful life of the assets.
Fair enough. Thank you.
And Kyle, just again, if you could go over the reason why we want to pause 2024 to build up the funds for 2025 and moving forward.
Certainly. So when a project is, when the town is going for a tender or looking forward towards a project, if you're spending $500,000 every year versus if you're spending $1 million every other year, for example, there's the inherent factors of economies of scale and cost efficiencies, and that you can get a better bang for your buck the more money that you spend at once rather than stagger that over a few years. So we're looking at this and saying, essentially, we're getting a better service for the same amount of dollar by staggering the years and combining the funding over multiple years, again, for better economies of scale from that perspective. So we can spend the same amount of money, but get a higher quantity of service from that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, just a question about our RCMP FTE addition. So in 24,
I'll just stop you there for a sec, Councillor Chapman. We're just doing this line item by line item.
correct.
so we'll get
Okay, I
down to
just
the
wondered.
bottom.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, so again, just for everybody's information, like we're just doing a budget deliberation here. We're not going to be writing any checks. So we're just trying to do placeholders here so that we have, our administration team has something to work with when we set this budget. And again, that can be changed before we set the mill rate. So again, we just got to give them something to work with. So Kyle and his team put 2 slides together, one with the 70-30 split funding coming through. And I agree, I'm looking forward to having that check come in as well. So that's why he's giving us 2 scenarios, whether we get the funds or we do not get the funds. Councillor Abrey.
Thank you, Mayor. So can another proposal be, and I know it's not going to have the money in 2025 as hoping, but you take half of that amount for that line item and you go to 212 instead of 425, because if we start decreasing this capital amount or this operational amount that we're going to take out of this 30% that we're going to get back, and we do that with each one of these items, that's our tax increase. And if we're talking operational, this is operational funding that we could put towards, our $300,000 we could put towards our operational funding, which is 3%, and we're looking at a 4-point-something% increase. So is this something we could, and I don't want to put more work on you and your team because you're already busy enough, but is that something we could look at to propose so we're putting less in and being able to cut the rate? Because I don't think we have a choice in our utility rates because, in order to keep up with the infrastructure and the manpower and stuff we need. So I believe we really need to look at this type of stuff to cut back as much as we can. And then as things start progressing with the town, some more development for residential, we could then start looking at putting an increase into this fund.
We definitely could. We do need some direction though from council as to what you want to see for service levels. What service levels do you want to see for your roads? we have gone through the asset management and the infrastructure deficit that, again, we're not special. Every municipality has, but again, we essentially pick these numbers because it represents the savings from the RCMP. If you do want to decrease these, again, this is the fourth budget meeting. We do need some feedback from council as to what you want to see from that. This isn't administration saying we need to spend these monies. This is just kind of a recommendation based on how the cookie crumbled. So if you do want to decrease it, we can definitely do that, but we do need some feedback. And going for the other items, the future arena expansion or the shop expansion, those items can certainly be cut back. But again, we do need some feedback and expectations from council as to what you'd want to see from that. The only one thing I would mention that it would directly affect if you cut back is just that we would have to require additional funding for that sanitary trunk line. Is we did earmark $1 million for the road program in 2025. So that additional funding could come from increase in utility tax rates or reallocation of the profit from our land sales to that sanitary trunk line. Again, those are options that we can consider, but we just need some direction from council on that.
Thank you, and appreciate the clarification on some of these items. So, due respect to Councillor Abrey and Councillor Pickering, I just have to mention that when we all ran for council, one of the biggest discussions we had on the street was about the conditions of our roadways and our sidewalks. So here last year we budgeted $1 million, and we had so much positive feedback from having that work done, and it needs to be done as per Kyle and Tim's explanations around the asset management. So here's an opportunity where if we put the money away for 2024, 2025, we'll have $1 million again to spend. And again, it works better for tendering out projects such as that. So in my view, it's something that needs to be done, but everybody has their own opinion on that. And I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time on this, Councillor Chapman, but I'll let you ask one more question.
Just speaking in favor of that recommendation, I just wanted to ensure that we continue in 24 with some of the emergency and essential patching that's going to go on so that we carry on.
That'll be done through their normal operating budget. So again, back to this comment about the road rehab. Most of us, if not all of us, were on side with this on earlier discussions. So again, I'm going to ask everybody around this table, the road rehab program, hitting the pause button for 2024 and then starting up again in 2025. And with your comment, Councillor Chapman, all the maintenance and repair of our streets and sidewalks will continue. Councillor Beekman.
Sorry, thank you, Mayor. I'm just going to make my position clear on all this, that I'm only voting based on the likelihood that we get the 70-30.
And that's, this entire discussion is based on us getting that 30% back. Okay, so one more time on the road rehab program. Is there anybody against that?
Just one question for you, Mayor.
Go ahead.
Just to clarify this, so this whole budget we're looking at is set up based on around 4.5% to 5%, not including, it is including this money that's coming from the RCMP, because if this don't show up, like you said, we're gonna have to cut these. So what I'm looking at is I'm in favor of actually doing the, like refraining from doing the road work in 2024, 2025, as long as this shows up. Because what we're doing then is we're, as Councillor Abrey said, we're putting money away and we're shifting around and we're putting a more tax load on to our residents.
So one more time, this discussion is based on us getting the 30%. So then are you changing your opinion then? Okay, so we have Councillor Abrey against, so that one is a yes. The area expansion, or I'm sorry, the arena expansion reserve, so that's based on the discussions we've had with the Waves and Blades Committee. about a future second sheet of ice. So one way to make that happen is to start putting some money away for that. So there's $100,000 that we want to put away in 2024. Is there anybody against that one? Councillor Beekman's against. So that is a yes. The Councillor Reese is against? Okay, so one more time. So we got Councillor Beekman, Councillor Pickering, Councillor Abrey, and Councillor Reese opposed.
Can I just clarify, is that we're just looking at the 3 years? Is this kind of essentially removing it for the 3 years?
Do you want to revisit this again next year, or do you want to do away with this for the next 3 years? Councillor Reese can go first.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. I just, based on the economy and just based on the taxes and all this information that we've been going through, I don't feel that right now, I know that we need a second sheet of ice. I know that people want it so bad, but when you look at the cost that it's going to impact us, I'm not okay with it right now. Maybe down the road, but right now, I think we need to just put a pause on it for now.
Councillor Beekman.
Thank you. Personally, I'd like to see it brought back again next year. You know, could we shift it a year and kind of see where we're at, where we stand financially for that? We definitely need it, but you know, kind of given the scope of that and what we're looking at for projected increase, I'd just say we hit the pause button on it for now.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor. Speaking in favor of this, from the point of view that the Waves and Blades have made a clear recommendation, and I think that this will be imperative that we start focusing on the future of our recreation in Coaldale and for the second sheet of ice as being planned. That being said, $100,000 a year can be done. My question more to Kyle now is that pending, if for example, we aren't able to get that 70-30 split and we drop the road rehab program, or any of these other line items, starting with the arena expansion reserve, would they be still, could we still plan for that, or that's all conditional?
It's all conditional as mentioned on the slide here.
Okay, okay, thank you then, and I'll speak in favor of the arena expansion reserve.
And just to mention one more time, like, we're not making any motions on this. We have time to talk about this on Monday. We're just hoping to get most of this information finalized. So moving down the list, the town shop replacement reserve, putting $50,000 away in 2024 and doing that for the next 3 years for a total of $150,000. So is there anybody against that? Councillor Beekman. Anybody else? So that one is a yes. The pathway reserve, putting away $25,000 each year in 2024, 25, and 26. Councillor Abrey.
Not speaking in favor or against it. It's just the more meters of path we have, the more it's going to cost for maintenance. And so do we know when it's going to be another tractor for pushing snow and another staff member for clearing it? And have we looked at the safety concerns of, you know, the darkness and people walking there in the wintertime and stuff? So is this what this fund would be used for? Is it to put more meters in, or is it to safen up the path we've already got?
It could be used for expansion of current pathways or new pathways. It's essentially allocating funds to a placeholder that council would have future discretion as to how it's allocated in the future. We look at it as the pathway expansion that happened over the last number of years. You know, that was approximately $1 to $1.5 million that was invested. So we're just looking at Coaldale as a growing community, that there's likelihood of future needs of pathways based on the success of this. And when these requests do come up, do we want to start saving for it and having the funds available? Or do you want to address it as the situation comes up? So it's not earmarked towards anything specifically. When the capital project were to be approved that requires the funding, again, council would ultimately have authority over that decision.
And also to mention that with the new developments coming on stream, northwest and south Coaldale, there's going to be a natural expansion of these existing pathway system through those areas as well that we have to have money put away for. Councillor Chapman, you had a question?
Yeah, Mayor, thank you. So my question to you, Mayor, is this. If any one of these line items fail, based on some of the support or non-support, does that mean that this whole slide would fail? I'm suspecting that it's all conditional on one thing, and so we've already failed on one, possibly two line items. Does that make the rest fail?
It does not. We can go through it. That's why we have it broke down this way. And then we can pick and choose to meet our budget line at the end of this discussion. So when we say no to something, it doesn't affect the rest of the items. Okay, so back to the pathway reserve. Is there anybody against putting away $25,000 each year for the next 3 years? Thank you. That's a yes on that one. The cemetery reserve, putting away $10,000 each year. Anybody against that one? That's a yes. Thank you. And then the RCMP full-time position, again, that's going to be based on us getting the 70-30 split. And this was brought up to us in 2023 when we were, 2022, I should say, when we were doing the budget deliberations. And we hit the pause button on that one position. And this is something that is quite important that we fulfill the request by our detachment commander. I know it's all based on funding, and again, this slide is based on us getting that 30% back. So with us getting the 30%, is there anybody against adding the other additional RCMP officer? We got Councillor Pickering, you have a question?
Yes, I do. This officer that we're talking about adding, is that going to be affected by us bringing our own, like if more sheriffs come into town or if we increase our own bylaw officers? Is this going to be still required?
Those discussions haven't even been, haven't happened yet with what's going to happen in the future. This is something that we need over the next 3 years. And moving forward, the additional RCMP officer is what they're requesting right now, one more position. They would actually like to have two. So this is only one position, and there's no discussion about what's going to happen in the future with policing. Councillor Chapman.
Maybe just to refresh us, Mayor, then we have eight members now. So we have 9 members now. The request is for one more to make 10. The position that the staff sergeant's asking for is more specialized, and I'm just wondering if I'm not in favor of increasing at this time, and whether the staff sergeant could reallocate resources to fit the specialized position that he's requesting.
Kalen has a comment.
Thank you, Mayor. We do have our staff sergeant presenting on Monday, part of a quarterly report, so I don't want to speak on his behalf in terms of the logistics of why he wants a certain position. I think it would be best communicated by him on Monday. What I will offer up, though, that from a compelling sales perspective to the levels of government that we've advocated to for the 70-30 cost share, reinvesting a portion of those savings back into another officer that gets pooled in with the broader region and the post-attachment system that we have, I think adds strength to the request that we're making, and I would respectfully request that council consider that component with this overall funding decision.
Thank you. So with the comments that our CAO just made, then we can ask the staff sergeant on Monday, and then that can still be part of the budget discussions. Okay, Councillor Abrey has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. And this is for our CAO. Yeah, Kaylin, can you ask him if he can have some clarity on what those sheriff positions are that the province has put into the city? Because my understanding is that that is for all of the South to use, and it would be kind of that position that the staff sergeant is looking at in Coaldale. So is the resource already here, and it's going to be something that's duplicated? Respectfully, I don't agree with your comment that we should look at giving 25% back of what we get, because you know, if they make us whole, they make us whole, and for us to get a, you know, to give 25% back, I don't think that is a fair comment to tell council to look at it that way. I think we need to look at it. Are we getting it or are we not? So I just need to respectfully say that.
Thank you, Councillor Abrey. So that brings us now to the next slide where we are not successful in getting our 30% or Coaldale being made whole. So again, I'll just read the line item from our CFO that should the town not be successful in their pursuit of the 70-30 cost sharing agreement with the RCMP, the above represents budget adjustments that would be proposed. In other words, council can make the above noted reserve transfers as well as the 10th RCMP member proposal. So if we want to make any of these line items happen, that money's got to come out of reserves then, correct, Kyle?
To a point, except the funds can only come out of the reserves for so long until the reserves are depleted. So it's not a sustainable long-term solution.
That's correct.
Could I just ask a point of clarity on one? The arena expansion, I didn't catch that. Was that a yes or a no?
That was a no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so then based on Kyle's comments right now and any of these line items, that is an absolute must right now that we want to take funding out of reserves for.
Oh, sorry.
I'm seeing no interest in that. Okay, go ahead. Say that again.
What was the question?
So if we are not successful in getting that funding from the province to make up that 70-30 gap, any of the items on the slide that's before you right now, the funding would have to come out of reserves for that. So the only one that jumps out for me, again, is for us to continue with our asphalt overlays and sidewalk replacement where we can. But that's the one that I want to push for. The arena expansion we already talked about, the town shop. Is there anybody against putting away $50,000 a year for the next 3 years for that shop out of reserves? Councillor Reese, Councillor Beekman, Councillor Pickering. I'm going to be against that one as well. So the arena expansion is a no. The town shop replacement is a no. The pathway reserve. You want to take money out of reserves for that one? Councillor Reese?
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. For the pathway reserve, if we're not successful in that pursuit, can we just delay that for a time being, for a few years or something?
We can do whatever council decides. We're just trying to give our administration team some direction here.
I think that that would be a good way to go about it.
Okay, and then the cemetery reserve. That one is a yes. And then the RCMP we already talked about. We'll talk about that further on Monday. And is there anybody against taking money out of reserves for the road rehab program? Councillor Abrey. Go ahead.
I'm against taking that money out. I think if we don't get, I'm with you in the sense that I like the asphalt overlay program, and I'd like to see that continue. But if we don't get the split, I'd want to revisit dropping that 425 in half at least. And it would take us longer to get to our achieved goal, but it would still put us moving forward.
I'm just going to ask the question the way it is right now, the 425. Is there anybody against us taking that out of reserves? Okay, so that one is a yes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. So the question I have with that, if we're unsuccessful, then would those reserves continue annually for road rehab repair?
For the next 3 years, yes. Okay, I think we covered off enough for now on that one. Go ahead, Kyle.
Okay, are we good to move on to the utility rate discussion then?
That's correct.
Okay.
Well, Councillor Abrey had a question?
Yeah, so just back to the reserve, you said a very key point. There's only so much there before the reserves run out.
Mm-hmm.
How much reserve is going to be left after you've taken out, $2 million for what we want to do for these projects? Is it going to impact other projects that we've identified that reserve money for?
I'm confused by the question because we're not proposing taking any funds out of reserves.
I was sure that's what the last vote was, is taking 425,000 from the reserve accounts to put to road rehab in 2024, taking, the money from the reserve accounts into these now. So now I'm concerned that we're going to deplete our savings account in a time of,
Yeah, I do apologize for the confusion, but that wasn't the intent to withdraw any funds from reserves, because these are funds that would be going towards reserves if we're successful. So essentially, if you're not successful, there's no money to go in there. Sorry for the confusion on that.
Are we clear on that then?
yes, so to be clear, we're not successful at the 70-30. There's no money going into road rehab. There's no 425 going in there.
No.
Okay.
Okay, utilities.
So the first option that we have on here is the one that council will be familiar with. This was presented at the last operating budget. So the increases here are based on variable and consumption. So I'm going to highlight them there. So it includes a flat fee increase for water and storm, and the 10% year over year for the water and the sewer. So on average, this does equate to essentially a 5% increase for the next 3 years. Just of note that our water cost, some of this is designed to allocate our future water cost, is expected to increase by 2% next year, plus a 3% surcharge from the Water Commission as well. So not all this would be going to future capital, it would be going towards operating as well. But we did want to present council with essentially a second option. So this is focusing, what has changed here is we've cut in half the increase for water variable. So from 10%, it's only 5%. Since our sewer costs have risen so drastically this next year, we still had to maintain some level of funding. So what we did was we reduced the increase from 10% to 6%, but we did add an increase of 50 cents a year for the storm flat fee as well. So that drops the increase from 4.92% next year versus 3.9%. The total change in net revenue for future capital projects over 3 years is $440,000. So administration has attached to this council agenda a utility rate bylaw. Those utility rates are reflective here of option number 2 based on our recommendation. But again, that can also be adjusted based on how council would like to proceed. So I will pause here for any questions on the utility rate discussion.
Any questions, comments? See none, you continue.
So what I have here is 2 slides detailing our water and our sewer reserves over the future. These are largely because we have 2 debentures required for the water reservoir and the sewer trunk line for next year. So based on the assumption here, there will be new debt that will be required. For the water reservoir, it's a debenture payment of $5.3 million, averaged at 10 years. Current rate right now is 5.2%, but that will actually change depending when the actual debenture comes out. So we're speaking here of what's going into reserves. We have capital expenditures, we have debt payments. So we just wanted to provide a slide of how these project over 10 years and how these project over 15 years once we fully fulfill our capital projects under the offsite levies bylaw. So this project, this water reservoir, you can see over the next few years, the actual amount going into reserves is not that much bigger than the funding required for the debt payment on the water reservoir. In 2025, there would be funding of $725,000 going into water reserves, but the debenture payment on that would be $690,000 a year. That's partially offset by cash levies, but again, those are dependent on future development and when we're going to receive them. So these are levies that we've projected to receive over the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years. It could be offset by future additional development that does come online as well. Secondly, the sewer reserve, sanitary reserve, essentially the same thing. You'll see here once for 2025 and 2026, the debenture payment is essentially equal to the funding going towards reserves. So again, I would like to show, kind of paint the picture that we're not inflating the amount of funds that are allocated to reserves here. There will be future infrastructure that will have to be required, that will have to come from this sources of funding. So this will likely reduce as additional requirements do come up. But again, you can see that under this model, in 10 years here, or sorry, by the time we get to 2031, we're still under $2 million in that sanitary reserve, fulfilling all the projects under the offsite levies program. In 15 years, we would be at $2.5 million in reserves compared to the $700,000 that we have today. So not a large increase in that funding, but again, essentially just enough to get by for what we have planned at today's time.
Any questions for our CFO? Okay, thank you. Move on.
I'm going to go through the capital plan next. So this is the big document that you have printed out. I'm just going to go through the notes here, the ones that do have notes. So the 2 emergency vehicle services, note number 1, those are partnerships with Lethbridge County. So a portion for the town of Coaldale and a portion under a fire service agreement with Lethbridge County. Point number 2, the Civic Square outdoor space. Phase 3. We are still waiting on a $1 million CFEP grant application. Just of note that since we are waiting on that CFEP application and the actual cost for the outdoor space, the debenture amount is of $593,000 is somewhat still contingent based on those actual funds coming in. Project number 3, point number 3, the Civic Square Phase 1 addition. This was originally scheduled to be repaid through an internal loan from the additional MSI operating funds and some rental revenue. We're proposing to fund that through the land sale reserve account essentially reducing the required tax increase. Had we not done this, those funds for that internal loan would not be available for the operating budget and would result in a higher tax increase from what is being proposed now. Point number 4, the sewer enhancements for the Birds of Prey facility. This one is still grant dependent. We're still waiting on the outcome of that grant. Point number 5 here, no change in the scope, but this is an offsite levy project that we've allocated some of our future levies in the next couple of years towards this, in which additional $690,000 will be recovered from this project. But we essentially do have to prepay that cost until those funds do come in. This is the same with point number 6 for the 20th Street and 30th Ave project. This is an offset levies project. The proportion for offset levies is only 50%. We did have a higher amount previously in the budget, but we did have to reduce that based on the offset levies report. Point number 7, the annual road rehab program that was subject to the discussions regarding contingency on the funding that we just had from the RCMP. Point number 8, the water reservoir for $11.1 million. The debenture amount for $5.3 million. Right now we're proposing a 10-year debenture. Current interest rates are at 5.26%. That would be funded through future utility revenues and offset levy payments. Again, that is a majority of that is 75% a offset levy project, but we do have to front the majority of that cost and collect that through future development as it occurs through the town. Point number 10, so same with the sanitary trunk line. This is a 90% offsite levy project. Again, we do have to front the majority of the cost and collect those in the future as future levies are collected. And that sanitary trunk line is proposed as a 15-year debenture for the amount of $3.16 million. That debenture over 15 years at current interest rates at 5.46%. We did have that previously at 10 years, but based on the funds that we are currently allocating to the sanitary reserves, it wasn't enough to meet the annual debenture payments. And again, note number 12, the road rehab program for the sanitary trunk line, that is dependent somewhat on fully dependent on the RCMP costing being successful in council's discussion on this item. If that isn't successful, then we will have to look for additional means, possible debt or other sources of revenue to fill that $1 million. We have tabled the fire engine removed from the budget to the Emergency Services Committee meeting as discussed at the previous budget meeting. And administration can also provide any information on rent versus own options for fleet capital should council have any questions. So there are a lot of capital projects here. I'll just leave it to council if there are any questions or comments on these.
I'll open up to members of council if they have any questions for our CFO. These were all items that we've gone through previously budget meetings, so I'm hoping I don't have to go through every line item. Councillor Abrey has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to hear the pros and cons and the benefits and drawbacks of purchasing versus leasing or leasing versus purchasing, especially on mowers that sit for 7 months a year.
Good evening, Council. Justin McPherson, the Director of Operational Services. Thank you for the question, Councilor Abrey. Yeah, so I'm going to touch base on the light trucks and the fleet. Russ is coming up to touch base on the mowers. I didn't expect that. So, yeah, so for the fleet, we have, for large fleet, for large equipment, this council has seen us present on a couple pieces of large equipment in the past. The hydrovac truck is one I'm going to use as an example. When we present on that large equipment, we present options on leasing, renting, contracting out, or purchasing our own. So large equipment is kind of a separate item. I just want to touch base on that. When it comes to light trucks, we heavily weigh this. You'll see some larger municipalities that consider renting and leasing. They do economies of scale. One thing to consider, when we are buying trucks, we have 35. That includes the fire trucks. So 31 in the, between the towns, the departments, and then there's about 5 in the fire department. So how we operate our trucks in this town, and most communities our size do this exact same thing, is when we replace a light duty truck, we replace the most critical positions first. That's your utilities positions. That's the people that are on call, most likely due to an emergency, and then fire is also included in that. So those trucks kind of get replaced first. And as those trucks are replaced, they get pushed down to less critical, all the way down to our summer staff in those trucks. So the trucks you've seen purchased over the last few years, those trucks mostly have gone to growth, and same with the truck purchasing of next year. That truck is actually going to a growth business. So we're not actually replacing a piece of our fleet. We're adding to our fleet because of a new position, and it's always been a new position for the last 3 years. So one other thing to consider, when we purchase a new vehicle, it's not the same as, say, me personally, if I was to go to a dealership and buy a vehicle, I pay the retail price, while municipalities gain the benefit of the purchasing power of all the municipalities. So while we are only purchasing one truck next year, there's municipalities all across Canada totaling hundreds of thousands of vehicles that they're purchasing. We benefit from the purchasing power for that. So I have a couple of examples I want to break down. So the 2021 Chevy Silverado we purchased, the rate on the lot was $48,000. We purchased for $37,000, so it's a 21% cost savings. I have a few other examples, but the average is about 20 to 21% of benefit. So if you weigh that against leasing, we would have to lease, even if we lease 10 vehicles, we'd have to just lease those 10 vehicles every year and pay that cost, which the cost is, it does make sense at some point in municipality. I think that point is about 50,000 people though. So I hope I answered the question about light duty trucks.
Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Justin, for your update on that. I know that Councillor Abrey and myself and the previous council, we deliberated the value of leasing, renting, purchasing, and I think the recommendation at that time was to lease. Or am I hearing that you are looking at a different model of getting vehicles for, especially light trucks for that matter?
I'm sorry, Councillor Chapman, I'm confused. I don't remember a conversation about
That's
this.
correct. You wouldn't have been here then. So that's why I've said that Councillor Abrey and myself, we had gone through some of these discussions back then in terms of leasing versus purchasing and that sort of a thing. So I think, is that something that you're continuing to evaluate in terms of best practices for the town?
Yes, yeah, we evaluate it. Not every year, but every second year we go over the leasing prices, rental pricing. Something that's happened over COVID has caused rental shortages and truck shortages, I'm sure you all know. So purchasing was the right decision over COVID, and that is something we'll continue to evaluate as we grow as a municipality and as different options come to light.
And Justin, while we have you up there, there is a question asked about the line painter, whether it can be used for streets and parking lots as well as green spaces. I'm not sure who that question was pointed at.
Do you want me? I do have some information on that. Let me just grab it. So the unit that we proposed as part of the budget for line painting for sports fields is a unit that is a little bit cheaper than replacing the existing vehicle kind of painter. Its price tag is $36,714. If we were wanting to use it for roads and parking lots, I'll let Justin speak to that and the value of that, because he's certainly evaluated that. But it would need to upgrade. It would need to actually be a difference of $36,714 to upgrade that piece of equipment. So it more than doubles in price. We did look at that prior to presenting the first time, and we don't see the same value in it. As far as sports fields goes, that's all I can speak to, and I can tell you that there is paint savings involved within this decision of up to and around $10,000 to $13,000 a year, as well as manpower rather than 3 people being on the field running lines and things like that. It's going to be 1 person, so that's about a savings of about $14,000 a year. So I can only speak to what we presented earlier. Justin has circled back and looked at the possibility and if there's value in upgrading and doubling the price.
Yeah, so if I can take a minute of council's time. After Russ presented this, we asked ourselves if this is something we could utilize in our operations department, as we always do, because one thing I think Russ and I do well is communicate together and see if we can find any efficiencies. So this GPS line painter, while in theory it can paint lines on a road or on a parking lot, for instance, most of our line painting on roads is done by a contractor in the middle of the night. This mitigates traffic issues, and it's actually a very good deal we get with some local contractors because we tender that out each year, and they are very competitive pricing. One other thing to consider is the other line painting that our internal staff do. It's actually not line painting on roads. It's on the curbs, it's on gutters, it's on uneven surfaces, and that's not a practical application for a device like this. So one thing we could utilize a device like this for in the future is parking lots. But parking lots are painted about every 5 years at a cost of about $250 in paint per parking lot. And the 4 parking lots identified are the future parking lot here, the future parking lot at the rec center, the one at the arena, and the museum. So it would save us about $1,000 every 5 years, give or take.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Beekman.
Thank you, Mayor. Russ, you had mentioned this new line painter would give us about 10 to 13,000 in savings in paint. Is that more because of the inefficiency of our current line painter? And so having said that, would buying a less expensive, less glitz and glam line painter, but newer, still be able to increase the efficiency in paint, but still not have the $35,000 price tag? And the reason I ask that is doing my own due diligence, I called a couple local rental companies, and the biggest reason none of them own a line painter is they told me that they're about $15,000. So when I saw the price difference there, I said, okay, so tried to do my own research into line painters a little bit. And I mean, if you went to not a $35,000 one, would we still be able to increase the efficiency of paint usage?
So the efficiencies with the automated, system are mainly because of how low it is to the ground and its regulation of paint rather than an operator trying to regulate the paint, and it being higher up and the loss in spray. So there have been a number of studies provided. The city of Calgary also uses the same piece of equipment and have noticed that savings. And so it's just in the efficiencies of a piece of equipment using GPS and computerization rather than operational. There's always the ability to buy a lesser expensive piece of equipment, whether it's a line painter or a mower or a tractor, but generally you get what you pay for. And when you're doing line painting as much as we are, a football field is, I think, don't quote me, but I believe it's 5 times the amount of lines that a soccer field is. And we're doing that on a regular basis, soccer fields on a regular basis, baseball fields. So we're doing a lot of line painting. And so I hesitate to go with a cheaper version of what's worked.
And that kind of leads me to my second question was, how often would you say the line painter gets used? Like our fields in town, how frequently are we painting these lines?
The guys are painting lines weekly on each one of the athletic fields. But that is also something else that that also speaks to the efficiency of the piece of equipment that we're proposing to use, because it is as low to the ground as it is, and because it puts on such a uniform spray. Some of the savings isn't just in quantity of paint, but it's also how often you're painting. And then I don't know if you wanted me to speak to the mowers on the lease option because that was maybe lost. And I'll say right at the start, you're probably aware that I'm not prepared to speak about exact numbers or things like that. However, it has been a question that has been asked of me in other locations and positions before this. And really, Justin spoke very well, the economies of scale and the use of the equipment and the premiums you pay when you do a lease. It's very similar to Jordan at his gym and leasing versus treadmills, and oftentimes it's the more quantity of equipment that you have where you start to hit tipping point. The other thing that I want to, and so I'll just suggest that we haven't looked at that, whether we're at tipping point yet. I can tell you that the previous community that I worked for had twice the amount of equipment and we weren't at tipping point. So I can speak pretty confidently that we're not. The other thing is that maybe some people don't realize too is that some of the mowers that we use, not all of them for sure, but some of the mowers we use are multi-purposed and they are actually out doing snow removal and things like that and sanding during the wintertime as well.
Thank you. Any other further questions, comments towards our presenters? Okay, so Kyle, where are we now on your list?
Was there any further questions on any of these capital projects?
So again, I'm hoping I don't have to go through it line by line item. Is there anybody have a question on any of the items that our CFO presented on? So we have enough information to start making some decisions at our meeting on Monday.
Okay, so essentially from here, what we'll do is we'll just look at what the budget looks like as presented. So we'll present the formal budget approval for council on Monday. So essentially having the line items finalized then is what we're looking for. So from what I've understood is the only ones we're taking out of this budget. We are making the museum funding somewhat contingent on the Gem of the West future presentation in the fall. Of course, we do have the contingent items on the RCMP, but we are removing the arena expansion as well. Were those the two items that we needed to adjust from the budget as proposed?
That's correct. And then the RCMP discussion, we'll save that for Monday.
Okay.
And then the only other one that I didn't ask for a straw vote on, and I can circle back to that now, is a presentation on the PPE fire department. So based on the presentation by Clayton, they picked out a shopping list of items that they require that amount to $90,000. And we as a council are not gonna, or expected to get into the weeds about what kind of gloves he has to get and what kind of helmets. It's based on the amount of the ask. And so I'll open that up right now if there's any more follow-up questions on that. And if there isn't, I'm going to ask right now, just for the sake of our CFO moving forward, is there anybody against providing the $90,000 for PPE for the fire department? That'll come out of the operational surplus and there'll be no tax impact. Councillor Abrey is against, and based on everybody else, that one is a yes as well.
Okay, so one item, one further, sorry, was there, am I good?
Go ahead.
One further item that is part of the funding, I forgot to add to the presentation, but I was just going to briefly mention to council, when we did put this funding budget proposal, if you look at this year-over-year funding, we tried to essentially get this somewhat as close as we could. And so under the MGA, you're required to pass a 3-year operating plan. So the tax rates here that we're looking for 2025 and 2026, they're not set in stone. They're going to be revisited, but they're essentially a fairly well placeholder for what's to come in the future. So what we did for this, and based on discussions I'm hearing for council, I can kind of anticipate how this is going to go. We did somewhat try to stabilize the increase over the 3 years. So I apologize for excluding this, but we did add this mill rate stabilization. So what this mill rate stabilization does is it mitigates the increase or fluctuation in your tax rates from year to year. So what we had proposed to kind of annualize that funding was additional funding in 2024 that would be offset and used to reduce the tax increase for 2025 and 2026. Council can reduce this $100,000 for 2024. The only thing that it will do is it will essentially reduce your tax increase by 1% this year, but it will increase it by 0.5% each year for 25 and 2026. So I do apologize for the late information. This just kind of came to mind as during the presentation. But again, if you're just looking to reduce the 2024 mill rate, this is an option that you can do as well. But again, it will involve kind of kicking the can down the road to somewhat higher tax increases for 25 and 26 that won't necessarily be as flat across the board. Does that make sense?
Any questions for our CFO on that? Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor. And just on that one slide, Kyle, just for information, the line above it for FCSS payments last night, the FCSS Barons Eureka Ward Warner Board approved the interim budget, and there will be no increase in requisition for 24.
Certainly, yeah, and the increase here is will go up because it's also tied to our population too, which does increase as well. So, yep.
Any further questions, comments? Okay, Kyle, go ahead.
Okay, so based on where we are, so again, with the exclusion of the arena, so essentially for easy math, just knock 1% off these numbers here. So this would leave a average tax increase for 2024 of 3.9%, 2.62% in 25, and 2.68% in 2026. Again, we had proposed some increases to the franchise fees as well, on the basis that those are more tied to user pay system. The more you use, the more you do pay for that, is a way to mitigate somewhat the tax increase. But again, this is ultimately subject to council's decision. So do you like what we have proposed? Would you like to see some type of other arrangement for Monday as part of this?
Councillor Beekman.
Thank you, Mayor. And less to your question, Kyle, but I know we get, circling back to this capital list, I know we get to ask a few questions, but we never discussed any of these items, you know, what we want to omit, what we want to keep in. Are we just, is it an all or nothing with this capital list?
No, it's not. Like I asked a couple times if you wanted to go through any of these items on this list. So for the sake of clarity, because of this list, I'm going to ask administration to come back, because it's going to end up being like last year when we went through this, we had to make a motion on each item. And I think that would be the easiest way to go through on that. And would that be suitable if we do it that way?
Yes, please. Thank you.
So for Monday, we can have this presented in a way that we can go through each one. You can say yes or no. What we're looking for Monday is we do need some more clarity on the operating side, which we do have. So we can circle back to this on Monday as well.
Because that worked quite well last year when we did that. So
when we're looking at the proposed impact, again, reducing this tax increase by 1%. So
and Kyle, I'm just going to interrupt. I forgot that Councillor Reese had a question.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. Through to Kyle, I'm curious to know about the vacant land tax that we've chatted about in the past.
Certainly. So our previous, I won't get into the weeds on the details of it, but when we did run that calculation 2 years ago, if it was fully enacted and adopted by council, it would result in that at that time additional revenues of approximately $65,000. Again, that was at 2 years ago, so it's possible they have gone up or possible they have gone down. So should council want to enact that or enable that tax this year, this could reduce some of the funding increases you do see on the screen.
Thank you. Personally, I want to see that enacted.
If you could just back up and give us a little history why that was turned down the last time this came to council.
Certainly. So the last time we went through the list, the majority of the properties on that were developers who were actively had lots that were ready for sale. And at that time, council didn't want to add a double tax for those, essentially punish those lots that, due to whatever reason, were not selling at the time. From the presentation that we had from the citizen at the last meeting regarding unsightly lots that weren't necessarily part of developments ready for sale, the percentage of those lots that were representative of that vacant tax were small comparison to the developed lots prepared for sale. So at that time, council turned it down as they didn't want to tax those lots because of that. That is the Coles Notes history of that.
Thank you. So would it be fair to say, do you want them to come back for Monday's meeting with this vacant lot tax staff report?
Yes, please.
And for you to be able to do that for Monday's meeting, is that doable?
It's not doable for us to calculate the amount. It's actually quite a significant process based on the steps. If it is something that council would like to enact, my recommendation would be to budget it based on our previous amount of $65,000. It'll fluctuate, not significantly, but it'll allow us time before you set the mill rate to finalize it. So that way, if it does go up by 10,000 or it does go down by 10,000, you can always adjust it at that time for then. That would be my recommendation.
And then the question I have for you regarding that then, when you had this brought up as a staff report previously, was there opportunity for some of the developers to come and speak to this?
I don't believe that was an option. I don't believe that was brought forward at that time.
Okay, thank you. So do you want it to be based on the 65,000? So I'm going to ask, like Councillor Reese wants that to be brought forward. Is there, for anybody else that's in favor of that? Okay, so the direction's being given.
Okay, it's very simple for us. We will add that into it. Would you like to see just this scenario adjusted for the vacant land tax in and one with it out? So you can have essentially option A, option B for Monday?
Yes.
Okay.
And then we're going to decide on that one by a majority vote as well.
So again, these numbers will slightly change based on if the vacant land tax has gone through and the reduction of the arena. But based on what you've seen today, we try to quantify everybody talks about the tax impact. We try to quantify everything for a tax impact, the franchise fees, and the utility rate. So this is what would be proposed over 3 years. Again, not including any of the adjustments discussed today. Just leave it if there's any questions on these items.
No, I think we have enough information, so we're going to bring this back on Monday, and then we're going to have the capital broken down, and we're going to end up having to do voting on each item again, is the feeling I'm getting around the table. So if we can have that for Monday as well. Is there any other questions, comments? Councillor Abrey.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like it brought back again Monday, clear on what we're putting into each reserve account. So we can look at that, because I still feel that in our economic times that this is not the time to be doubling or putting away extra. And I understand that we have to, and there's needs according to our asset management, but it's also, I keep going back to one paycheck away from not being able to pay your utilities, or your children can't play in the school sports teams because we don't have the money, and we're putting a 7% increase in property taxes and utility rates. So I think we need to think of more than just ourselves when we're looking at this budget. We need to look at our whole town. We need to look at those on fixed incomes. I personally have 2 staff members that live in town, and I get to hear about it every day on how they don't have enough to make ends meet. And do we pay our school fees, or do we buy groceries this month? So I really think, and they both rent, and so they're going to be hit with this increase because the homeowners are not going to take it. So I'm worried about the future of our town, the growth of our town, and I really urge council to really look at the direction they want our town to go by increasing and not really considering what we are doing today for our future.
And just to follow up on that comment, Councillor Abrey, is that what we're trying to do here is to minimize the impact. So if we do something today that's going to help in the next 3-year budget cycle, but if we do not make these increment adjustments, it's going to come back to haunt us in the future, and future councils will have to deal with this as well. So keep that in the back of our minds as well. Okay, so is there any other direction, questions, comments that we need before we receive this as information? Seeing none, then can I get someone to make a motion that we receive the budget deliberations report as information? Councillor Reese, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 7.1 under bylaws and policies, we have the fees and rates bylaw 881-C-12-23 regarding first reading. And again, our CFO Kyle Beauchamp will be presenting.
So this fees and rates bylaw, along with the utility rate bylaw, it's kind of the chicken and the egg discussion here. I know you haven't formalized the budget yet, but these are 2 bylaws that, for the operation of the town, we are looking to have them finalized for the beginning of the new year. These are being presented to you for first reading, so that second and third reading can be discussed by council at Monday's regular council meeting. So the fees and rates bylaw essentially covers what we charge for all of our services, except utilities, in one standard bylaw. So I won't go through these all in detail for the purpose of discussion, but scrolling through on the screen here is the old fees and rates bylaw. Everything in yellow has been proposed to be changed. The items here kind of in the middle would be the new excuse me, the new proposed rate, followed by what this rate was or comments were in the previous year. So the majority of these have changed. We did on average 5%, as many of these haven't changed for a number of years, except those which did increase more. So for example, cemetery here, we did increase these slightly more, closer to the 10% range, based on twofold. These rates have not been reviewed or updated since 2019, and we do have the columbarium addition, which we did have to add this year as well. Development fees, essentially a 5% increase, give or take a bit for rounding on there as well. Same thing with our community standards and bylaw enforcement fees, essentially 5% give and take based on rounding. Emergency services, these rates have largely been standardized in the bylaw. We do charge rates based on the current Alberta transportation rates. So rather than putting a specific rate in here that we go back to update every year, we just reference the current Alberta transportation rates. And largely the new items that council will see are under recreation and culture fees. there's a large addition here due to the recreation center. So this is a new service and amenity available to the residents, but again, our rates need to be adjusted to reflect that as well. So I will just leave this to council. If there's any questions on specific items, be happy to discuss them rather than go through these line by line.
Thank you, Kyle. I'll open up to council. Is there any questions, comments on any of the line items? Councillor Reese.
Thank you, Mayor Van Rijn. My question is about the order to remedy the fine for that. Right now it sits at $250. Is there a way to increase that for, those people who have the noxious weeds and unsightly properties and things like that, and they've been fined once, twice, and nothing's being done about it? I'm just wondering if we shouldn't increase that to kind of make a point.
Yeah. Is this the page you're referencing, or is that on the next page? There you go. Yep, at the bottom here. This was an item that I did discuss with our manager of community policing, Mark Anderson, and what his advice was that these, and I'm going to try not to butcher it, it's something that I can come back with more information, but for us to essentially charge somebody with these fees, it requires us to go through the court process. So the time required and the time required to process it through the courts for us to essentially assign a prosecutor for that to do those can be quite a significant process. So his recommendation at the time was that it's more done through the bylaw service, in which we bring in contractors to knock these weeds down and whatnot. I would suggest that this is an item as I'm speaking, we bring back more information to you on Monday.
Sounds good, thank you.
And something else that we can do too, we can look at passing this, and then we can always look at it again when we have our meeting of the whole. And then we can go through items to cut down time that we don't have to spend at a council meeting on this. So I like Councillor Reese's ask, and do we need to have that for Monday, or is that something that we can do at a future meeting of the whole?
A future meeting would be fine.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions, comments? So on this one, we can look at passing first reading, or we can pass all three readings and then cut back on the agenda for Monday. Is there any appetite for someone to sponsor first reading? Councillor Chapman. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Now I'm going to ask for unanimous consent to continue. Someone want to make a motion for that? Councillor Pickering. Oh. Go ahead, Lana.
Point of order, Mayor. Second reading needs to come first and then unanimous consent afterwards.
Good catch. Councillor Pickering, you want to make a motion for second reading? Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Now a motion for unanimous consent. Councillor Chapman. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Everybody's in favor, thank you. Carried. And now I need someone to sponsor third and final reading. Councillor Chapman, any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 7.2, the utility rate bylaw 860-C-12-22. Again, first reading. We have our Chief Financial Officer, Kyle Beauchamp, presenting again. Go ahead, Kyle.
So the rates that you do see here are reflective of the option 2 rate that we did discuss with council as part of the budget. So that was an average of a 3.9% increase for the average household for utility rates for 2024. The large changes that you will see here is we've adjusted the budget for on the commercial side for the water and the sanitary collection, in which the flat fees are tied to the size of the water meter that is at the property. That's tied to the fact that larger the water meter, larger the use, the larger impact on the infrastructure as well. This is something that is not uncommon and is often used in other municipalities of greater size than Coaldale. Same thing with the stormwater. For the commercial side, we have tied this to the size of the lot. So greater than 1 acre or less than 1 acre. Again, the larger the size, the likely larger herd of hard surface, which increases the storm water runoff as well. Other further increases, the hourly rates for labor is billed. That does go up year over year. The bulk water, we have also proposed a 5% increase consistent with the water usage rate, as well as an increase to the water meters based on the size, the price increases that we are seeing for those as well. If I can find it. Here's somewhere in here. But anyways, water meters on the screen here. I'll pass it over to you, Mr. Mayor, for any questions on this from council.
Thank you. I'll open it up to members of council. Any questions for our CFO on this one? Fairly straightforward. It's based on user pay. Seeing no more questions, could I get someone to entertain making a motion to approve first reading of the bylaw as presented? Deputy Mayor Saylor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Abrey is opposed. Motion is carried. With Councillor Abrey opposed, then we'll leave this one for the council meeting on Monday to come back for second and third reading. So that concludes the business items on tonight's agenda. So with no other discussion, I'm looking for someone to make a motion that council adjourn the meeting at 6:44 p.m. Deputy Mayor Saylor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you.